Hi everyone, welcome back to another week of Ramban ala Torah, ala Parshan specific. Obviously our hearts and our thoughts and our minds are still with the Chatufim and the Chayalim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should grant us, in the schos of our learning and other things we're doing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should grant us a speedy victory. Okay, to the extent there's a theme, I want to do 4 Rambans today. To the extent there's a theme, it's the personal relationships amongst Yaakov and Rachel and Leah, and they're very, very complicated. But first, something that's not personal, but might trigger the idea of, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu change his mind? It's a question that comes up from time to time when we learn the Parsha. Vayinachem Hashem al ki asa ta'adam, right? Vayetze vel libo, the sense that, well, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the future, why would he change his mind? Why would he have to come up with a new plan? Here, there's this strange pasuk. Vayashkem Yaakov baboker vayikach et ha'evan hashasam mara'ashotav. Right, Yaakov sleeps in the makom hamikdash. He takes the rocks. Vayasem otam matzeva. He makes one matzeva. Vayitzok shemen al rosha. Now, in all the discussions about did the avos keep the Torah or not, one of the questions that comes up is, wait, isn't building a matzeva an isur d'oraisa? Why is it that it seems like the avos built matzevot, and yet it's an isur d'oraisa to build a matzeva? So the Ramban right here says, Vayasem otam matzeva, kfar pershu rabotenu ha'hafresh shebein ha'matzeva lemizbeach. There has to be a difference between a matzeva and a mizbeach. So first, it's simple. Shehamatzeva even achat, v'hamizbeach avanim harbe. Okay, so the first thing is, a matzeva is one stone, and a mizbeach are many stones. Okay, v'nireod. Shehamatzeva ta'aseh l'nasech aleh nesech yayin, v'litzok aleh shemen. A matzeva is for purposes of pouring wine on, or pouring oil on. Lo la'olav ala mizbeach. Obviously, you don't slaughter an animal on a matzeva. That's for a mizbeach. V'hamizbeach lahalot alav olot ushlamim. A mizbeach is to bring karbanot. Uvivoam la'aretz ne'esra aleihem hamatzeva mipi shesamu ota haknanim lahem lechok yoter min hamizbechot. Says the Ramban, when we came to Eretz Yisrael, so not even at Har Sinai, and we encountered matzevot, and it's clear that Knaanim established a matzeva to be a form of worship of their God. Afal pi shekatuv bohem et mizbechotam titotzun o shelo ratzah le'asor hakol v'yishia mizbeach shara'u l'nasechu l'karbanot. So they came and they saw matzevot at mizbechot. So says the Ramban, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to aser mizbechot because he needed something to bring karbanot on. But matzevot, he decided to aser. Now, again, that raises the whole fascinating question, I think, of, wait, what does it mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally liked matzevot, and then the Knaanim adopted matzevot as a form of worship, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu then changed his mind and hated matzevot? So it's a complicated question. It's a complicated issue. It comes up in a number of places. It's possible to say, and I'm not saying this definitively, but it's possible to say that it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved or hated matzevot. It's that in the ordinary course, a form of worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was a matzeva, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu liked it, until the time that a matzeva became associated with a form of avodah zarah, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu stopped liking it. But liking and not liking, not in the sense of human beings liking or not liking, HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepting it as a form of worship. I think, and I want to be careful how I say this, we're obviously not supposed to follow, right? We're not supposed to follow the actions of the goyim. So take, for example, it's a strange case. We once had a minhag, we still have the minhag, of decorating shuls for Shavuot, right? But part of that minhag used to be having like a tree in shul, a Shavuos tree. Now, the Vilna Gaon thought that became usur when there became such a thing as Christmas trees. Right? It's very similar to what we're discussing, which is if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not committed to something, meaning there's nothing particularly religious about a Shavuos tree. Yes, it reminds of a Maimon Har Sinai, and it's lovely. But if it then becomes associated with another religion, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kiviyachol, is allowed to change his mind. Not that he ever thought one way and then changed his mind the other way. When something became associated with, when something is associated with a form of avodah zarah, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is willing to pass on it as a form of worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, it's a complicated issue. I raise it because I think it's interesting, and let's let it be. Okay, now let's go to Perek Chaf Tet, Pasuk Tet. Okay, says the Torah. This is Yaakov is about to meet Rachel. Odenu medaber imam v'Rachel ba'a im hatzon asher le'aviha ki ro'ahi. It's interesting, right? Ki ro'ahi is unnecessary in the pasuk. Rachel came with our father's sheep. We would know from that she was taking care of the sheep, or that she was a shepherdess. But the Torah says Rachel ba'a im hatzon asher le'aviha ki ro'ahi. What does it mean that Rachel was a ro'ah? So says the Ramban, Lehagid ki ein litzon lavan ro'eh acher zulata. First of all, there was no one else to take care of Lavan's sheep. Why Lavan couldn't take care of his sheep, I don't know fully. But the pasuk is saying, no, she was a ro'ah. Ki la levada masar avia ha'eder, v'hi levada ro'ah otam kol hayamim. Right? Her father gave her responsibility for his flock, and therefore Rachel was a ro'ah. She was a shepherdess. Lo telech bahem. So first of all, it means, presumably, that Lavan had no sons, or no sons that are of age. It comes up later in the parsha when Lavan's children say that Yaakov, looted Lavan's house. So maybe his children were born later. But at the time, he had no sons, because presumably he would not have allowed his daughter to take care of his sheep if he had sons. And the Ramban says, in addition, lo telech bahem Leah achota klal. Leah also was not involved in caring for the sheep. Now, why not? So first he says, v'lo haya inyana kivnot yitro. We have another situation in the Torah, right? Obviously, Yaakov meeting Rachel at the well reminds us of the fact that later on, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to meet Tzipporah at the well. Tzipporah apparently also was a shepherdess. So he says, but it's not the same. V'lo haya inyana kivnot yitro. Shehaya sheva benotav kulan ro'ot ka'achat. Right? All of Yisro's 7 daughters, they cared for the sheep together. They shared responsibility. Says the Ramban, that's not the case with Rachel. K'mo shamar v'tavona v'tidlena. Now, why could Leah not also care for the sheep? So Ramban has 2 possibilities, both of which are interesting. First, he says, V'ulai ba'avur ki einei Leah rakot hayahashemesh mazikla. Right? We don't normally focus so much on it. When the Torah says, V'einei Leah rakot v'rachel hayta yifat tov yifat mareh. So, okay, we're kind of biased by Rashi, who says that she was Einei Leah rakot because she cried a lot because she thought she'd have to marry Esav. But the Ramban says, no, V'einei Leah rakot. Maybe there's something wrong with her eyes. And being out in the sun all day was dangerous for her. And so therefore, Lavan said, fine, you stay home, and Rachel will take care of the sheep. Right? Presumably they didn't really have sunglasses then, or fancy things like that. So maybe that's the reason why Leah couldn't do it. The other possibility, which sounds like the Ramban thinks it's the real truth, ba'avur shehayta Leah gidola re'uya leish v'chashash la'aviha. Right? It could be Leah was older than Rachel. It could be that Leah was of an age where he needed to worry that the other shepherds would start up with Leah. Maybe she was desirable that way. Maybe, presumably you don't send your 15-year-old daughter if you could send your 10-year-old daughter. I'm making up the ages, but you assume that something like that is the case. So he was worried about Leah. Now, that makes sense until you think to yourself, well, what about Yisro? Yisro had 7 daughters, many of them, some of them at least, had to be of marriageable age, had to be of an age where he'd have to worry that something bad could happen to them. So the Ramban answers the question. He says, Aval Yitro nichbad b'mirkomo. Yisro was well known and well respected. V'kohen haaretz. V'yiru migeshet el binotav. Right? He thinks Yisro didn't have to worry that anybody would start with his daughters. He was a priest of the land. He was Kohen Midyan. Presumably, people respected his daughters and would not have started up with them. So that wasn't a concern for Yisro whereas it was a concern for Lavan. Oh, in addition, another possibility, says the Ramban, Shaya Lavan sanua mimenu, maybe Yisro should have been concerned, but wasn't because he didn't have great tznius. But Lavan was more tzanua. Ki mishpachat Avraham kishera tzanua. He belonged to the Avraham family, and they were modest. And he didn't want to send out his teenage daughter to shepherd the flock. However, v'Rachel hayta kitana ve'ein lachushla. But Rachel was young, and so there's no reason to be concerned that anybody would start up with Rachel. Now, yes, but then you ask yourself, well, did Yaakov Avinu fall in love with a little girl? Yaakov Avinu was a full-grown man, right? It strikes me as a little odd. But the Ramban ties this to something else. V'zeh inyan vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel. That's why Yaakov gave her a kiss. What does that mean? Presumably, right, we'd be concerned. Why is Yaakov kissing his niece, his future wife? You know, all kinds of halachos come to mind. So he says, it could be that Rachel wasn't of age. So he was able to kiss her without worrying about it. Ohu kedivrei Rabbi Avraham, like the Ibn Ezra, ki nishika belamid einena bepeh. He didn't kiss her on the lips. Rak nashak ota al rosha o al ktefa. It's like kissing on the forehead or kissing on the shoulder, more of a friendly kiss than an intimate kiss. Now, the Ramban has used both ideas to save us from the problem of, Rachel was the shepherdess because she was young, and that's why Yaakov kissed her. Left unanswered by the Ramban, and certainly by me, will be, did Yaakov Avinu really fall in love with a little girl? Is that what happened? Because the Torah seems to say that it did happen. The Ramban doesn't address that. So the Ramban gets us out of our problems for why Rachel was a shepherdess, why not Leah, and why he wasn't worried about Rachel, and why Yaakov kissed Rachel. Again, left unaddressed is the question of how Yaakov, or why Yaakov fell in love with a little girl. Okay, good. Now, they grow up. Lavan fools Yaakov, as we know, right? He works 7 years for Rachel, and instead he gets Leah, and she doesn't tell him who he is, and they marry each other, and only in the morning does he realize it. And the Torah says, Vayavo gam el Rachel, okay, Vayehav gam et Rachel mileah. No, I'm in the wrong place. Vayar, okay, the next pasuk, right. Vayar Hashem ki sinua Leah vayiftach et rachma, right, the Torah connects it to, God sees that Yaakov hates Leah, and so he makes Leah fertile immediately. V'Rachel akara. Right now, is Rachel an akara because Vayar Hashem ki sinua Leah? Hard to know. And I wouldn't go so far to say it, but God sees that Leah is sinua. Now, the problem is, the Ramban is on one hand bothered by the fact that, Yaakov Avinu hated one of his wives. It's not a midah that you would associate with Yaakov Avinu. On the other hand, she did a terrible thing to him, right? I wouldn't think it's so bad to call her sinua unless it means something else. So he says on the one hand, Vayashem ki sinua Leah, pasuk lamed aleph, Hine Leah rimta ba'achota, gam Yaakov. She didn't just cheat Rachel, right? She also cheated Yaakov. How? Ki im nomar shenahaga kavod be'avia she'achaz ba v'hichnisa elav va'al tamer bo. Okay, it's possible you say, look, Leah was under the control of her father. Her father had this idea to fool Yaakov Avinu. She could have said something under the chuppah, but it would have been a rebellion against her father. She would have been turning her father in. She would have been giving him up. So fine, says the Ramban, I understand that. However, even if all that is true, hayala lehagid o lirmoz ki Leah. When they got back to the bridal suite, she either could have told him, or at least hinted in some way that she's not Rachel. Af ki hayta mitnakeret kol halayla. Instead, right, Leah pretended to be Rachel the whole night long, right? They had relations. And she didn't tell Yaakov who she was. And presumably, you know, that's a terrible thing to do. And Yaakov was furious at her. Ulefikach lo hikira ad shera'ot hababoker. Right? The pasuk is clear. Vayavo, no, in the wrong place. Vayitein lavan la, no, okay. Vayhi vaboker v'hinihi leah. He only finds out in the morning when he sees her. She should have told him in some way during the night. Okay? Ulefikach lo hikira ad shera'ot hababoker. So he didn't know it was Leah till the morning. V'lachein Sana'a Yaakov, right? On some level, you know, that's worthy of hatred. Of course, because of they're halachically married, it's not rape. But Yaakov Avinu thought he was having relations with Rachel the whole night long. And therefore, says the Ramban, right, Yaakov hated Yaakov hated Leah. Now, what's the problem? Vo Elokim yodea. But God knew, it's true, what Leah did was wrong. But Leah did it because she really wanted to marry Yaakov. She wanted to marry a tzaddik. And therefore, God has mercy on her. V'kach amru b'breshit rabba kevan shera'a Yaakov ma'asim sherimta Leah ba'achota natan da'ato legarsha. The Medrash says, when Yaakov saw this, he thought, I should get divorced from Leah. She cheated me. V'kevan shepakta kadosh baruch hu bebanim, but immediately she became pregnant. Amar li'iman shelelu ani megaresh. Am I going to divorce their mothers? So the Ramban is connecting. It's true he hated Leah. Therefore, God immediately rewarded Leah with sons, to make it impossible for Yaakov to divorce her. V'zeh tam vayar Elokim, ki chamal aleh shelo ya'azvena. Right? God had mercy on Leah so that Yaakov not leave her. V'yesh omrim, okay, so that's the real pshat. V'yesh omrim, there's another pshat. Ki shtayim nashim ha'achat ahuva ma'od. When you have two wives, so if one of them is really loved, Tikra hashniya sinua kinegda, right? That, like the Torah says, I think in Kiseitze, right? Kiyana leish shtei nashim ha'achat ahuva va'achat sinua. What does that mean? So the Ramban says it means there's the wife that you love more, and there's the wife that you love less. But the way the Torah refers to the wife you love less is not that she's ahuva pachot, rather she's sinua. Because if you're a wife and your husband loves the other wife more, you feel hated, right? That's the result. You say to yourself, oh, you know, why can't it be that he loves both? But that's not how it is, right? You know, wives are called sarot to each other because they measure things against each other. And if you love one wife more, the other wife is sinua. Kimosh nemar vayav gam et Rachel mi Leah. Lo shesina'a. He didn't hate Leah. He just loved Rachel more. Vayta bosha b'davar, but that hurt her, right? That was insulting to her. She was embarrassed by that. V'ra'a Elokim et Anya. Okay, so two pshatim in the Ramban. The first is that he really hated Leah because she cheated him, because she pretended to be Rachel. Not under the chuppah, but she pretended to be Rachel all night long when she could have told him the truth. And therefore, God rewards Leah to protect Yaakov from divorcing her. He rewards Leah with children immediately, right? The other pshat, which I like more, it's just because you'd like to believe that Yaakov Avinu wasn't really capable of hatred. The other pshat is he never hated Leah. It's just the Torah refers to the second loved wife as sinua, as opposed to the wife you love more as ahuva. And psychologically, I think that that's true. But okay, that's the relationship between, or that's the, we'll call it, you know, the love triangle between Yaakov, Leah, and Rachel. Now, all these things are going well for Leah. She's having son after son after son. Vatere Rachel kilo yaldali Yaakov, vatikane Rachel ba'achota. Right? Rachel is jealous of Leah. Again, not a midah we associate with the imahot, just like hatred is not a midah we associate with the avot. But in the course of events, these things happen. Why is she jealous? Kilo yaldali Yaakov, vatikane Rachel ba'achota. Now it comes. Vatomer el Yaakov, hava li vanim v'im ayin meita anochi. Which doesn't sound that bad at first. Hava li banim, give me children. V'im ayin meita anochi. And if not, in a worst case scenario, let's translate this, I'm going to commit suicide. Right? It's very, very dramatic. What's Yaakov supposed to do? What does it mean, hava li banim? So says the Ramban, Amru ha-mefarshim shetitpalel alai. She wanted him to daven. V'im ayin meita anochi. That's Rashi. Okay, shemi she'ein lo banim chashuv kamet. V'hu medrash rabotenu. Okay. Now ask the Ramban, and we should all ask this question, Va'ani tema. Im kein lama chara po. Right? If all she asked him was to daven for him, like Yitzchak davened for Rivka, like his father davened for his mother, why did he get angry? V'lama amar hatachat elokim anochi ashem mana mimech privaten. Right? He responds in an angry way. Vayichar af Yaakov berachel vayom hatachat elokim anochi ashem mana mimech privaten. It's not my fault, he says. V'shomeh el tzadikim Hashem. He's supposed to believe, right? V'ani tema. Im kein lama charapo v'lama amar hatachat elokim anochi v'shomeh el tzadikim Hashem. So what? He'll daven, God will listen to him. Umasha amar. Now the medrash, right? There's a very painful medrash that Rachel says to him, "Do what your father did." Right? Your father davened, and then his wife gave birth. So he says, Abba lo hayu lo banim. Ani yesh li banim. Mimech mana v'lo mimeni. Hashem mana mimech privat. And it's not me, it's God. Mimeni lo mana. Now says the Ramban, the obvious question. V'chiyat tzadikim einam mitpalim ba'ad acherim. It's true, but tzadikim don't daven for other people. V'nei Eliyahu v'Elisha yitpalu ba'ad nashim nachriyot. What's the problem? Why does Yaakov respond with such anger to Rachel's seemingly reasonable plea? Says Ramban, V'nireh, shebishvil zeh tafsuhu raboteinu v'amru b'reishis rabbah, amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kach onim et ha'meikot. I'm sorry, kach onim et ha'meikot, question mark, right? That the Medrash says that God said to Yaakov, that's how you treat a woman who's in pain? Chayecha shebanecha atidim la'amod lifnei binah. The children of Leah will have to stand in front of Yosef HaTzadik, the child of Rachel, and they'll be judged. Okay, but in that answer, Yaakov really did sin. Valder chapshat, says the Ramban, but I have an explanation. Amra Rachel Yaakov, sheyitain la banim, ube'emet da'ata lemor sheyitpalel aleha. Aval sheyitpalel aleha ad sheyitain la banim al kol panim. Right, it wasn't just daven for me, say some Tehillim. It was demand of God that I have children. Right? Whether it's suicide or she'll just die of her sadness, it's dramatic. Says the Ramban, Dibra shelo kahogen bekinata. She spoke inappropriately because she was jealous of Leah. V'chashva ki ba'ahavato ota yitane Yaakov yilbash sak va'efer v'yitpalel ad shiyu la banim shelo tamut b'tzara. She thought she could cause Yaakov to demand of God. He's going to fast. He's going to wear sackcloth. He's not going to live a life until God says, you know what, I'm going to give Rachel a child. And you can't do that. But there's the next Ramban on Vayicharaf Yaakov, which makes it even clearer. Vayicharaf Yaakov, why does he get angry? So the Ramban says, She'ein tfilat hatzadikim biyadam shetishama v'ta'aneh al kol panim. Because even the avos, they can't demand things of God. It's not like they can be sure that God is going to give them what they want. Uba'avu shedibra derech ga'aguei hanashim ha'ahuvot lahafchido b'mitata chara apo. Because she threatened him with her own death. He got angry. Ulekach amar la she'eino b'makom elokim shifkod ha'akarot al kol panim. That it's not up to him. He can't decide it. It's up to God. It's not his fault. Ki mimena nimna pri habaten v'lo mimenu. V'zeh liyaser oto lahachlima. Yes, that was to theoretically or metaphorically slap her across the face and say, you're acting inappropriately. You're demanding things of me that I can't deliver. because Yitzchak Avinu, my father, God promised him children. So when he davened not just for Rivka, his wife, he davened for himself. But I have sons, he said. And it's actually ironic that he has sons, according to the Ramban, because he hated Leah. And so God gave Leah children. He says, but I can't demand children. I have children. Vihine. And that showed it to Rivka. Vihine hatzadeket. Bir ota shelo tuchal lehisamech al tfilat Yaakov. When she realized that for all the reasons Yaakov explained to her, she can't rely on his tefillah. Shava lehitpalel al atzma kel shomeat se'aka. She davened for herself, maybe for the first time ever. She really, really davened. V'zehu vayishma eleha elokim. God responded to her tefillos, right? When it says about Yitzchak that God listened to his tefillah, not Rivka's, because Yitzchak was a tzaddik ben tzaddik and Rivka was not, the exact opposite happened with Rachel. God listened to her tefillos and not to her husband's. V'ulai nitkan al dat rabotenu. Ki Yaakov. Maybe now we'll explain better. Ki Yaakov. I'efshar shelo nitpalal al ishto ha'ahuva ki akarahi. How could he not have davened for Rachel? Right? She was the one he loved. She was the one he worked for. How could he not have davened for her? She was an akara. Ela shelo nitkabla tfilato. But his tefillah wasn't accepted. And maybe he felt bad about it. Right? This is the psychological part. The Ramban sees like the dynamic between a husband and his wife. He's davening for her. He's really trying his best, but it's not working. Uba ata Rachel lehitolel alav, and Rachel comes and she mocks him. Le'moshe yiten labanim al kol panim b'tfilato. Kin lo nofel hu me'aviv shasakein. Your father davened and his wife became pregnant. Why can't you do the same? And that hurt him. Right? That's hard. You're not equaling your father. And so he says, Vayichar apo vayomer la ki adavar biyad alokim v'lo biyado. Va'aviv nishma'at tfilato shehu tzadik. Va'atid liyot lo zera. Aval hi nimna mimena pribaten v'nachonhu. Right, that's the point I made before. She gets under Yaakov's skin by saying, how come you can't get me children the way your father got your mother children? And the answer is, says Yaakov, my father didn't have children. And therefore he could demand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu children because he got a bracha that he would have children. But I have children. Now, of course, it's a mean thing to say. But the point, says the Ramban, is because, when she pointed out to him that he was failing her, and he was failing the standard of his father, Yaakov Avinu took it personally, and he responded maybe in a slightly angrier way than he should have. But the point he makes is a fair point, which is, I have children, you don't. I can't demand it of HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way my father demanded it of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so we saw a bunch of Rambans. We saw, the changed status of a matzeva, whether God changed his mind or not. That's fascinating. Then we saw Rachel was a roah, she was a shepherdess, maybe because Leah couldn't go out in the sun, maybe because she was younger, right? The difference between Lavan and Yisro on that point. Then we saw Leah was a sinua. Either she really was, because she should have told Yaakov overnight after the chuppah who she was, or she was a sinua compared to Lavan, who was ahuva, right? Ki tiyana leish shtei nashim, the psukim in Kiseitze, when one wife is beloved, even if the other wife is not hated, she's described as sinua because in the relationship between them, that's how it works. And finally, the dramatic confrontation between Rachel and Yaakov, where she demands children, and the answer is, says Yaakov to her, the answer is, my father delivered children from my mother because he had no children, and he had a haftacha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he did have children, but you not, God is punishing you, not me. Again, not a high point, but something we could understand in terms of the dynamic of a husband and a wife, and how sometimes a wife could say something where, even if it's Yaakov Avinu, he responds in a way that maybe he shouldn't have. Okay, that's it for today. Yashkach, Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.